This is a 90-minute roundtable featuring 4 guests of our symposium that I will introduce briefly and then let them present short 10, 12, 13-minute propositions, ideas directed at our theme of physical performance theater and Buto in the contemporary context. So what I'd like to do today is reflect on contemporary practices, artists from different fields who have engaged with the matter at hand. Our first speaker is Michele Danjoux, on my right, fashion designer, fashion educator. She teaches at the Montfort University and has exhibited and curated exhibitions and worked collaboratively in interdisciplinary production. And she became a member of the DAP Lab a few years ago and has been an incredible asset for us here. She has, of course, been involved in some of the productions that were created by the DAP Lab, and her collections of garments have been exhibited at these public events as well as at other festivals. So without further ado, please welcome Michele Danjoux.
Okay, the title of my presentation is on reconfiguring identity, design in motion toward a more intimate and dynamic design process. So as Johannes says, I'm from a fashion design background and have been working with dancers for quite a few years now. I'm going to start by just letting a few images roll through, and these images come from the Becoming Leaf film that Johannes produced and I was creating the garment design concepts for. I'd like to present the concepts on Becoming Leaf for design concepts and also touch briefly on the concepts for 2 of the prototypes that I produced for Ukiyo, Movable Worlds, where I look at integrating technologies more. So on reconfiguring identity and design in motion, I'm asking a few questions. So what effect can the garment have on the transformational process? How can it be a part of the morphing body? And how specifically can the garment be a part of the metamorphic form of dance, Buto, and the body that becomes? I don't think that any of us can dispute the importance of the costume or garment in the Buto performances. Sandra Fraley talks about it a lot in her recent book on Buto metamorphic dance and global alchemy. She talks about the dancer Denise Fujiwara saying Fujiwara wears a tattered dress in unearthed and a long flowing gown in wellspring. These aid in her relationship to the rock and the water. She goes on to say how Buto choreographers understand the importance of costume taking pleasure in serendipity, surreal juxtapositioning, exaggeration, and concentrated design. In the book Kazuo Ono's World from Within, Without and Within, we can see many examples of Ono's love of costume and garment, and in Peter's film last night, beautifully viewed through the shots and the intimacy of relationship with garment. And what really mattered to Kazuo Ono was the intuitive response he had to the garment. In his dance, it did not come to life unless he was deeply charmed by what he wore. And so we see him moving through formal male attire, morning suits, white shirts, black suits, and into female Edwardian wear, exploring aspects of different cultures and then returning to kimono statements as well. So moving then to the concepts for Becoming Leaf. Becoming Leaf responds to the notion that formal attire imposes a serious demeanor on the part of the person wearing it. It's also connected to the idea of breaking down habitual patterns of movement that we often develop through wearing. So it's employing an experimental approach and looking at the idea of using the white shirt and the idea of taking a conventional item and beginning to deconstruct and reconstruct that item. It's also very interested in the fact that this item is second-hand. There's a series of second-hand white shirts, and the second-hand aspect is of huge importance because it has a past, it has a former wearer. The previous intimate relations with humans, the garment without a body is now awaiting a new body or wearer. And Elizabeth Wilson talks about this a lot in her Adorned in Dreams book, where she talks about discarded clothes as being like souls in limbo, waiting poignantly for the music to begin again. So I like the idea of the body and the garment activating each other. So Becoming a Leaf is a series of second-hand garments. They're classic white shirts, and they're partially or fully deconstructed. In Biyo's case, the garment that I designed for her was constructed from two shirts, the double shirt, the idea of two adorning the body. The design process was quick. It was a very responsive, flexible approach. I spent a few hours watching our Buto dancers performing. So Jun, Biyo, and Yumi were visiting us last year. After watching for a while, I went shopping very quickly with Anne Law, one of our collaborators in the DAP Lab, and we bought a number of second-hand shirts. We then came back and spent an afternoon of co-creating. So the interest to me is using a choreographic approach to garment design for embodied performance. For me, that's very pleasurable to actually work with moving bodies. You tend to, from my discipline, come from a very static approach to the generation of garments, from using flat patterns and 3D mannequins, but very rarely do fashion designers consider the dynamics of the moving body. I'm also extremely interested in abstraction in this particular piece, separate from symbolic or communicative, this idea of this aesthetic role of the garment in relation to the body, and the idea that this aesthetic can be dynamic and change in performance as opposed to being fixed. So in relation to the moving body, the aesthetic discourse here is an abstract art. My focus is on formal qualities of the work itself rather than what it represents, as design explores shape, structure, material, proportion, and form. So the classic white shirt has become the site for experimentation. It's open, unrestrictive, formality deconstructed, and exploring the notion of emergence and decay simultaneously. This idea of emergence, of deconstruction, is something that has been explored a lot by the Japanese designers such as Yohji Yamamoto, Issey Miyake, also some of the Antwerp Six and Martin Margiela, very interested in the idea of looking at the classic and breaking it down and reconfiguring it. As the body moves and inhabits the shirt, or the shirts provide a new skin for a new wearer, a state of in-betweenness and ambiguity is entered. So there's no set form to what we're seeing here, and that's both in terms of the garment and for the wearer. As recognizable garment silhouette and prescribed body relationships dissolve, the tearing, cutting and slashing of the cloth, pulling away of the seams and plackets, and shifting of garment features on the body renders the boundaries between the body and the garment mutable. A new sculptural space, Ma, is produced as traditional orientation is destroyed and reconfiguring of identity of body to garment or garment body arises. So this idea of Ma, or the space between the body and the garment, or the body and the space of the architectural space, and also the space within is very interesting to me, that psychological and physical space. So poised on the cusp of uncertainty and with the potential to morph anywhere, words that have come from Fraley when talking about performers, the moving body influences the form of the clothing takes, and the relative unwearability of the clothing becomes an artistic force for innovative impulse. So this notion is discussed further in Dorothea Mink's essay on the language of self, where she refers specifically to the fashion designers Raikkonen Kubo for Comme des Garçons. So on garments and nudity, obviously we're acknowledging that nudity is very important also to the form of to Buto. And when discussing costume metamorphosis, this is acknowledged by Fraley in many instances, that nudity in Buto is also an aspect of costume and another form of shedding the social body. So the shredded garments in Becoming Leaf render the body partially nude. I'm interested in this idea of being able to peer through the gaps, revealing the underside of the breast or the inner side of the torso, for instance. At the same time, the tattered garments allow for the manipulation of cloth. So I don't see this as an objectification of the body so much as extending out the lines of the forms of the body in performance. So the deconstructed shirts aim at a poetic as opposed to overtly cultural or social or gendered image. The aim is not to control through their presence on the body, but more establish a dialogue with the body through an experimental dance experience, so cultivating the listening body, a listening that may lead to a speaking through expression of movement. So that's basically what I had to say about the pieces that have been designed for Becoming Leaf. And just very briefly, I wanted to show you a couple of the prototypes that I've developed for our performance Ukiyo. So this is Red Mutant. It's interested in the percussive elements of cloth, the fact that it emits sound, that there's a relationship of sound to the moving body. It's covered in a lot of sequins, so when the dancer moves, there starts to be this vibrational quality in the space. I'm very interested in connecting to what Artaud has said about vibrational sound and the vibrational impact on bodies. When he's referring to the snake in his book on the theatre and its double, he says snakes do not react to music because of the material, the mental ideas it produces in them, but because they are long, they lie coiled on the ground, and their bodies are in contact with the ground along almost the entire length. And the musical vibrations communicated to the ground affect them as a very subtle, very long massage. Well, I propose to treat the audience just like those charmed snakes and to bring them back to the subtlest ideas through their anatomies. Now, I'd like to sort of play with that idea in my design, to play with it in relation to the performer and also in relation to the